So I'm just a little hoarse in the throat. We'll see how this goes. Should be able to get through it. I told Mary, no hugs and kisses today. Preparing for winter and spring. Seems like a simple enough subject, doesn't it? It's amazing to me how many people don't make it through winter. And in most cases, it's due to just a few simple things that we're going to address here. We're going to spend 45 minutes or an hour just talking about a few basic things and diving into them really deep. This is a picture of one of my bee yards in Dillard, Georgia, if anybody knows where Dillard is. This is down behind the old Piggly Wiggly that is no longer there anymore. Piggly Wiggly went out of business in Dillard, but it's a good spot. It's a good bee yard. As you can see, we're in the mountains. That's where the name Blueridgehoney Company comes from. A lot of people think we're in Blue Ridge, Georgia, but we're not. We're in Lakemont, Georgia, and I'll show you the address and stuff at the end of this presentation. But Dillard this bee yard is probably a half mile from the North Carolina border. Many of our yards are in North Carolina, and then the rest are in Northeast Georgia. And it's a good area. It's different. We're in a different world. Actually, we're on a different planet than you guys, to tell you the truth. Different strategies. Some of the dates and times you're going to see in this presentation is for us. You might have to rearrange the dates in your mind for what you do here. I'm guessing, Mary, got to be 3 weeks earlier at least.
Yeah, at least.
And yeah, maybe more. I know I used to go to Unadilla, and it was a good month earlier down there. Completely different plants in many ways. I was told you had a good goldenrod season. We did too. We got a lot of pollen. So important, and we're going to be talking about that. And you can see in this picture that some of our colonies overwinter as a double deep, and some overwinter as a single. I used to run a lot of deeps and a shallow, but I don't do that anymore. I want all my frames in the brood nest to be the same. We make a lot of nukes, and that's one of the reasons I like to have all of my brood frames the same. Anyway, prepare for winter early. It's so important to think way ahead. I know we're already into the middle of October. Sometimes I talk to groups about preparing for winter, and it's a little earlier in the season, and I start out by saying that the beekeeper's calendar year starts in August, which is actually true. And I learned that a long time ago. I was told that by my mentor back in 1981 when I got started in beekeeping. And he said that this was before Varroa mites. It was even before trachea mites. And he told me at that time that the calendar year for us starts right now on the 1st of August, because what you do from this point forward sets the stage for success going into winter, through winter, and it dictates what type of assets you're going to have in the spring to work with. So it's really true. And again, we're a little late on that, but we're still going to act like we're a little earlier and talk about it all. Mite assessment and control, queen assessment and nutrition. This whole talk is about that basically. Public enemy number one, okay? Sometimes I talk to small groups like this, and there'll be some folks that are non-treatment beekeepers, and I'm with you all the way. We've got some bees we're not treating right now. We're trying to search out good genetics for mite resistance, and what better way than to not treat some beehives and look for it. Now, we don't let them die. If we see the numbers climbing in colonies, we do a lot of alcohol washes. Actually, I'm using soapy water now. It works better. If we see a colony that's climbing in mite numbers and it's obvious it's not going to be a part of our breeding program, we'll treat it. We don't lose colonies because of mites. But absolutely, public enemy number one. Isn't that a beautiful picture? Yeah, beautiful picture. Yeah. Monitoring mites is of paramount importance in my view. Know where you stand. Even if you're a non-treatment beekeeper, I think it's helpful to know where you stand to see if you're on the verge of crashing. It's not hard to do unless you got a lot of colonies. We washed every colony here back in early August, and boy, that was a chore. It took us 2 weeks. It was over 1,000 colonies, probably 11 or 1,200 colonies, but at the end of it, we knew where we stood with every single colony. And believe it or not, some colonies actually didn't receive treatment because the mite numbers were so low. I would submit to you that every bee population has the potential in it for breeding for resistance. If you check 100 colonies, you might find 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 that actually are showing very low mite numbers. And of course that becomes your breeding stock right there. And that's the way we're approaching it right now. That's a lot of mites in that wash right there. If you've got, I haven't counted them. I need to count them one day so I know what I'm talking about. But if you see something like that in a mite wash, you're already looking over the cliff. You need to do something immediately. So if you can see mites, the time to treat is now. A lot of people will come into our store and say, I lost my bees over the winter, and they're full of honey. I think they absconded. And no, they didn't abscond. They just slowly dwindle away from attrition. My first question will be, well, did you treat for mites, or what are you doing for mites? Well, sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. And if they say yes, I'll say, well, when did you treat for mites? Oh, it was, it's late September, sometime in October. We got it done before winter. Well, that's the wrong answer. And now we're backing up to this 1st of August thing. The problem with treating for mites late is that you're treating the bees that have to make it through winter, and they can already be compromised not only from the damage done by the mites, but the viruses that the mites vector. And once you get rid of the mites, it takes weeks for those viruses to start to diminish noticeably. And so what you want to do is you want to treat and clean up the bees that are going to raise the bees that have to make it through winter. You want all those mite treatments over. You want all that chemical, whatever it is you're using, you want it out of your colony before they start rearing the bees that have to make it through winter. In our area, this would be the 1st of August. Down here, it might be just a week or 2 later, I'm not sure. But in our neighborhood, when the goldenrod pollen starts to come in, it's really highly stimulating for the bees, and they begin to rear what I call the fall buildup. It's the bees that have to be present throughout the winter and be there in the spring when new bees start to hatch. And it's so important to have the colony as a whole healthy before they start rearing these bees. I kind of use a colorful example. I've done it several times. Nobody ever seems to be offended. We'll try it here too. I like to compare bees to human beings from time to time. And in this case, I would compare the colony as a superorganism to a human being. We are a superorganism also. We're just full of living, talking cells, kind of like a beehive is full of living, talking bees that communicate with each other. Anyway, I like to say that if a mother is feeding a baby breast milk, that mother needs to be healthy if she intends to have a healthy baby. Look at the colony the same way. It has to be well nourished. It needs the mites all out of the way. All of these things that we're going to talk about here as we go forward. Anyway, that's an ugly sight. What this picture was taken from was when I had a double deep colony in the spring, late spring, and I cracked it open, and in April and May, the bees are really bent on rearing drones, and they will create a lot of burr comb between the boxes, the bottom 2 brood boxes, and they'll fill it full of drone brood, and that's what you're seeing here. That's a lot of mites in that little bit of brood right there. That colony was heading for a breakdown. And of course, when you see that, the time is now. You need to intervene. Even if it's early, you need to figure out how to intervene. That colony would not, it might be present in August, but it would be in horrible condition. Deformed wing virus is a big problem. If you see deformed wings, bees with deformed wings in your colony, you're already going down that lane. You're already heading down that road towards virus disaster. That's an ugly looking bee, and that's a really good shot of a mite on a bee. Now, one of the reasons you can't see mites on the bees often, even if they do have a fair amount of mites, is that the mites kind of tuck in underneath the bee and eat on the bee's fat body, and the ones that are on the bees that are not phoretic mites, or that are phoretic mites, and then the bees that are not there, or the mites that are not there, will be in the brood, the sealed brood. 80–90% of the mites can be totally on scene in a colony. If you visually see mites, you're already way up there in mite population. It's a simple kit. I highly recommend if you don't have one. There's a couple brands out there right now. This is the Varroa Easy Check. We sell these in our store. Very simple. Either fill them up with alcohol or soapy water. They're not terribly expensive. And that little cup to the left right there is, I just picked those up this year. They're very cheap. It's just a plastic cup inside a plastic cup. And the second cup that's inside just has a bunch of holes drilled in the bottom, and it actually works. You can make something out of a series of solo cups, to be quite honest. So you don't have to even spend the $27.50 if you don't want to. Whatever you do, you need to monitor your mites. So shake, swirl your device. A little shaking doesn't hurt, but swirling kind of helps a lot for at least 1 minute. More doesn't hurt. Either 91% alcohol or soapy water. In the case of soapy water, it's 2 tablespoons of Dawn Ultra Dish Liquid Soap in a gallon of water. It works actually better than that alcohol. We did a little test on a yard of our bees about 2 months ago, and shook the same comb into a Tupperware container and took a half a cup of bees and put it in soapy water and alcohol, and the soapy water showed about 1/3 more mites. It was a surprise to me. I thought the alcohol actually worked better. These are our recommended treatment levels. If you see 0 in a mite wash, your treatment is actually not required at that point. 1%, in other words, 3 mites on 300 bees, treatment is recommended, but it could wait. You're not in the danger zone yet. 2%, 6 mites on 300 bees, treatment is advised. If you do wait, maybe your supers are still on, don't wait another month, don't wait a long time. You need to get in there and get it done. And if you're over 2%, then you need to figure out how to intervene, because now you're entering that zone where the viruses are starting to pop up and show up. And like I mentioned earlier, the road back from that problem of viruses present takes a while. So just keep that in mind. And a half cup of bees, we just use a half cup measuring cup when we're scooping the bees out of a Tupperware tub, and right into that shaker device. And it's usually generally close to 300 bees. It might be 5 or 10 one way or 5 or 10 the other way, but it's close enough. And by the way, this isn't rocket science right here. You can take 2 washes on the same comb in the same colony of the same washing medium, whether it's soapy water or alcohol, do it exactly the same and come up with a little bit different numbers. Okay, so this is just giving you a general idea of what's going on in your colony. So just keep that in mind also. Just because you see 0 doesn't mean it's a 0, okay? Mite treatment strategies, there's many of them. We'll talk about it, not at length, but I think it's worth diving into them a little bit here. Looks like I have a little typo on the word mechanical. I'll have to fix that. Non-chemical, in other words mechanical, screen bottom boards are only slightly effective. I know this because I donated some bees to the University of Georgia to do a test comparing screen bottom boards to solids. The screen bottom boards resulted in 14.6% less mites than the solids. So does it help? Yes. Does it fix the problem? No. You still have to come up with other mechanisms to bring the mite levels down. You can't depend on just screen bottom boards unless your bees are somewhat resistant to mites. Drone brood, same thing. It works to some extent, but it's not the only answer by itself unless you've got some resistance going on. The way you do that is you put a comb in a colony, let the bees lay it full, and when it's sealed, you can take it out and freeze it overnight. It'll kill everything in there, including the larvae. Give it back to the colony and let them do it again. The reason that's helpful is because the majority of the mites prefer drone brood. Somehow they understand that it takes a few days longer for a drone to hatch than a worker bee, and you'll see a lot more mites per larva in drone brood than you will worker bee. And if you got some chickens, throw it in the chicken yard and watch them go crazy. They love the stuff. Okay, Brood break, only slightly effective without an added treatment. Brood breaks do work if you intervene with some oxalic or formic or whatever while there's no brood in the colony. Those three all done together at the top could probably be effective if you're very timely, you don't miss your dates. Let's see, synthetic chemicals, apistan, fluvalinate, coumaphos can be effective, but they are highly problematic today. All three of those chemicals, apistan, fluvalinate, and checkmite, are all becoming problematic because the mites are resistant to checkmite, which is coumaphos, fluvalinate, and apistan. And even in apivar, their amitraz, we're starting to see resistance building. We've been using amitraz for a long time now, and I'm surprised it's lasted this long, but even it is becoming problematic. But there has been some research that shows if you shift to another miticide for a while, sometimes the synthetic chemicals will once again become effective, so you can break the cycle and make use of them if you feel like you need to. They're also highly problematic because they get in your comb, and in the case of fluvalinate and coumaphos, they don't go away. I'm not sure I could call them forever chemicals, but I can call them pretty darn long in a comb chemicals. 40 years later, you're going to still see signs of coumaphos and fluvalinate in your colony. Even if you haven't used it for decades, it can still be present. Even if you've switched out all the combs, it'll still be present. It's like magic. I don't even know where the stuff comes from. There's been a few research studies lately showing that beekeepers that have never used the product have it present in their comb. Recent research studies have shown that 98% of all beeswax samples taken in North America showed some amounts of fluvalinate and coumaphos, so I highly recommend that you don't use apistan or checkmite. Apivar is not so bad. It does break down eventually, but again, it still is a synthetic and still is problematic in my view. That's why these days I'm happy to say that I'm an organic beekeeper. I only treat with organic substances because they are, in the case of oxalic acid and formic acid, they are not absorbed by the comb, and in the case of Apiguard and Apolife var, which is thymol, they are readily absorbed by the comb, but they dissipate in a relatively short time. You won't see it in a laboratory test, you won't see thymol present months later, even if you used it. So HopGuard, effective or problematic, you need to use several doses of it. It's messy. It's fairly effective if there's no sealed brood, but again, if you're trying to do something in the fall or late summer, you need to do several doses of it to make it work. Genetics, in my opinion, is the future. I predict, and Keith might laugh at this, but I predict in a decade we will not be talking about Varroa mites like we are now, because I see genetic resistance appearing everywhere. I have a friend down in Danielsville, Georgia, near the Broad River, and he's a past president of that club right there, and he caught 75 swarms this year on the Broad River. He put out swarm traps. Some years he gets over 100. He swears there's no beekeepers there, and he knows the area very well because he's very deep into the club there. He knows all the beekeepers. He says there's no bees there, and he's catching 75 to over 100 every year swarms. So where are they coming from? They're coming out of the woods. So it's happening. 10 or 20 years ago, we weren't seeing that, but now we're seeing it in many locations. Louisiana, I have a couple friends down there that catch bunches of swarms every year. So it's beginning to happen, and then we as beekeepers, if we do our part too, I think in 10 years, I think we'll still be talking about Varroa mite, but it won't be public enemy #1 anymore. Let me save questions to the end, or I'll go down a rabbit hole and I won't get back. Queen quality is one key to success. That first slide I showed, monitoring your queens, assess your queens. It's very important to do this early enough to where the colony, if it has a poor queen and you requeen it, she can rear a few rounds of brood before winter. If you have a poor queen in August, your colony is going to dwindle going into winter. You need a really good queen in late summer and early fall so she rears those bees that you need to make it through winter. It's amazing to me sometimes when I see a colony that was really robust and made lots of supers of honey in the summer and was full of bees, how it can shrink so much by the time October or November comes around. It simply means that the queen wasn't doing her job late in the season. I like to requeen every colony every year. It's just a personal preference. You don't have to do that. I know numerous commercial beekeepers that take the attitude that they'll just, if a colony starts to fail, they'll just pull it out and they'll put a fresh nuke in that spot, and they'll split the colony that's starting to succumb to bad queen, and they'll just split it to pieces and start a bunch of nukes like that. And that's the way they keep their numbers up in their colony. They split. They split ahead of the losses, and they use the colonies that are failing to do it. I think that's a good strategy. They never look for queens, they never requeen. They just wait till the colonies are going downhill. Now, a lot of people will tell you that, well, I've got queens that are 2 years old and they're still doing a great job. And I agree. I'm with you on that one. We have a lot of queens from time to time that are still doing really good in their second summer. But the question is, what are they going to be doing when it's time to go into winter? So I kind of look at queens a little differently than just a calendar. It's kind of like, I compare queens to machines, perhaps human beings too. If a queen goes through 2 spring peaks, she can only be a year and a half old, but in my view, be over the hill. She could be almost 2 years old, but have only gone through 1 spring peak, and she's not quite over the hill yet. It's that spring peak of brood rearing that really kind of takes a toll on them, wears them down a little bit. And by the time they're 3 or 4 springs old, of course, she's really shot. And I know I get arguments on that all the time, but if she was doing a really good job at 2 years old, what was she doing at 1 year old or a half a year old? You know, just keep that in mind. I can almost guarantee she was doing a little better. Now, after saying all of that, I'm going to tell you that the very highest production will come from a queen from the previous year. But you don't want a queen from the previous year that went through last year's spring peak. In other words, she doesn't have a spring peak behind her yet. That's going to be your very best producing queen the following year. In other words, she's less than a year old, but she is from the previous spring. Brother Adam wrote about this in his book, Beekeeping at Buckfast Abbey. He would make late summer queens and overwinter them in a 4-frame nuke. In other words, very low mileage, but in the next spring they were mature. They had enough months on them to be mature, but they were very low mileage, and he said invariably those would be his very best production queens the following year. So when is it good to requeen a colony in the spring? Number one is that you'll have much less swarming with a colony headed by a queen from the current calendar year. Even if it's a late summer queen from the previous year, you'll experience more swarming with that fall queen than you will with a queen from this calendar year spring. Also, that spring queen is going to do a decent job for you going into winter. Of course, there's no such thing as 100%, but your averages of all those spring queens will be much higher the next spring, the queens that are still present, than if you would have had queens from the previous year, if that makes sense, especially if they were queens that had been through the previous year's spring also. Hope I described that good enough. Isn't that a beautiful queen? I'd say that's an Italian queen, wouldn't you? Yeah, very nice. You know, you can almost look at a queen really closely and tell if she's got a lot of months on her by seeing how much hair she's got on her. It's not a perfect way of deciding, but brand new queens tend to be a little furrier. Bees in general are a little furrier, so you can sometimes just look at them and tell. And of course, if their wings are frayed, that can be kind of a red flag too. To feed or not to feed, that is the question, and that's a big question too. I know several people that say, I don't feed bees, it makes them sick, lazy, you know, just don't want to do it. And I listened to a man speak at one of the Georgia Beekeeping Association meetings years ago, prominent man from another state. highly respected, and said, don't feed your bees, it makes them sick. Well, that's a half-truth. Okay, let's go there. It's a half-truth. If you feed them improperly, he's correct. But if you feed them properly, he's wrong. A nectar flow or the provision of sugar syrup to a colony will increase the cleaning behavior, particularly stimulating older bees, and generally lead to a reduction in brood diseases. This is a quote from Fat Bee, Skinny Bees. Older beekeepers will recognize that title, Doug Somerville. It's a research study that was done in Australia. An interesting place to do that. And that's a quote from him. And I have bought into this 100%. Experienced beekeepers will tell you that during a nectar flow, you will see issues to disappear or diminish. Issues like European foul brood will diminish or entirely disappear. Issues like chalk brood tend to disappear or diminish. And other funny brood things that we don't even understand these days, little issues, tend to diminish or disappear. Why is that? There's some chemistry going on in a nectar flow. Notice as we move forward that he also said sugar syrup, and we're going to talk about that. There's chemistry going on in a colony when there's a nectar flow coming in. First off, and this surprises people, nectar is primarily sucrose. And the bees bring it in, and they're adding numerous enzymes to this inadvertently. It just happens as they handle it and store it and carry it. They're just adding these enzymes continuously. There's invertase, which inverts sucrose to fructose and dextrose because those sugars are more stable in storage. We won't go down that road. That's a half-hour lecture all by itself. And then there's diastase, which turns starch into sugar. And the one that's of most interest to me is glucose oxidase, because glucose oxidase produces gluconic acid. The presence of gluconic acid is what brings the ripening nectar down to an average pH of 3.9, give or take a half a percentage of a point. Most honey ranges around that 3.9 pH level. That's very antimicrobial, antibacterial. It's a big part of why honey does what it does. It's part of the immune system in a colony. The bees have less of an inherent in-body immune system than human beings do. Part of what they're doing to keep themselves healthy is in their food and in their cavity. In their cavity, they're using propolis. Propolis is also antimicrobial, antibacterial. Colonies that use a lot of propolis tend to have less issues than colonies that use no propolis, for instance. And we've been breeding propolis production out of our colonies for over a century because it's a sticky, gooey mess and we don't like dealing with it. Well, it's been a mistake because it's part of a colony's immune system. The presence of propolis is a good thing. The presence of this gluconic acid is a good thing too. And gluconic acid also is a byproduct of the production of gluconic acid is hydrogen peroxide. Fresh honey that's not really old has got hydrogen peroxide present in it, and it helps create an antiseptic condition inside of a colony. This is an interesting slide. I was given permission to use this by Lewis Bartlett at the University of Georgia. I'll try to explain it. It's a little tricky when you look at it. Basically, it's telling you the percentage or the amount of the hydrogen peroxide present. The blue bar on the left shows the level of hydrogen peroxide in the colony if you're doing nothing. If you feed high fructose corn syrup, that green one in the middle shows that the hydrogen peroxide level is going down. Not only does it curtail the production of hydrogen peroxide, but for some reason it seems to negate some that's already present. This is the problem with high fructose corn syrup. I know it's cheap, I know it's easy, I know it's all of those things, but if you're trying to do the very best thing you can for your bees, it's not the right sugar to feed. So the gentleman that was saying feeding can make your bees sickly, he did have part of it right. It just depends on how you're feeding, in my view. Now, am I standing up here telling you that sugar syrup replaces honey? No, I'm not. There's a lot of minerals and things that comes in honey that's not in sugar syrup. So I'm just saying that sugar syrup has a place. If done properly, you can actually make a colony healthier, literally, by feeding thin sucrose syrup. Okay, the box on the right, this is You know, when you look at a frame of brood, you got the pollen around the outside of the brood, and you got kind of this line of open cells. Looks like it might be fresh nectar, or perhaps it's honey that's been moved. It's in very close proximity to the brood because the nurse bees are using it and feeding off of it to create brood food and royal jelly. Those open cells, that's what we're looking at right here. In very close proximity to the brood, you can see how the bees are investing in this production of hydrogen peroxide. It's part of what keeps the brood healthy while it's growing. It creates an antiseptic condition right in the brood nest. They're investing in that concept. And it happens if you're feeding thin sucrose syrup. Providing a steady but moderate amount of thin sucrose syrup will maximize the stimulation effect. Also, stimulating older bees to be more hygienic. Providing large volumes of thick syrup will significantly reduce the stimulative effect, but it will increase the rate of weight gain. So I like to start feeding for winter real early and not feed thick syrup, because the thicker the syrup is, the less of this chemistry that we just talked about occurs. The thinner, I don't know what the bottom floor is on this, but generally speaking, the way we feed syrup, the thinner it goes, the more this chemistry that's occurring. They showed in a study in Bangladesh, of all places, that 1.3 parts water to 1 part sugar was better than feeding 1 to 1, and especially 2 to 1. They got more brood production, they got more wax production, and Doug Somerville talks about it eliciting this hygienic behavior, and then all the time as they're handling this stuff, the enzymes are getting introduced continuously, automatically. So there is a place for feeding thick syrup. I mean, if it's cold and winter's around the corner and you need to gain a lot of weight fast, that's the way to do it. But I recommend starting your feeding a little earlier using thinner syrup, perhaps 1 to 1. There's still a lot of chemistry going on with 1 to 1, and gain weight that way. White sugar is pure sucrose and thus emulates nectar. Glucose and fructose were found to be half as attractive to flourishing bees as compared to sucrose. And if you want to prove that to yourself, in a nectar flow, just put a comb of honey and lean it against the tree and watch the bees completely ignore it until the honey flow ends. Then they'll go rob it out. They're after the fresh nectar. That's how we approach it. 1 part sugar to 1 1/4 to 1/2 parts water is what we feed, excuse me, when we're trying to build colonies quickly, perhaps rear brood, grow comb, splitting colonies a lot, and that's really where you'll get your best results right there. Highly stimulated, and it elicits this hygienic behavior I'm talking about. Not a lot of weight gain if you're trying to grow colonies without them gaining a lot of weight. You're trying to make bees to split. There's your ticket right there. 1 part sugar to 1 part water is kind of the happy medium in all of this between thick syrup and thin syrup. It's still somewhat stimulating. You still have some of this chemistry going on. It still elicits a lot of hygienic behavior. And then when you drop down to 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, a lot of that is starting to diminish in a big way. Just know that. So what I'm saying is be mindful of what you're doing. Understand this and kind of use it as a management strategy to help your bees be healthier. And all of this stuff, if you do it before winter, it just ups the odds of getting your bees through winter. Now, if you got a double deep colony that's got 120 pounds of honey in it, do you need to do this? Not necessarily. But if you're gonna feed, do it properly. Now, I will tell you something that doesn't really have anything to do with us here in Georgia, but I have several friends in Canada, Michigan, places like that overwinter their bees up there, and they take all of the honey away and feed back sucrose syrup, and they have better overwintering results. And that's because they don't have the cleansing flights that we do here. Honey has a lot of, you could use the word ash if you like burn the water off or boil the water off, the organic stuff that's left would be considered ash. It's just indigestible elements in honey that the bees don't need in winter. And if you have bees in Manitoba, and you can't get a cleansing flight for 5 months, You don't want any of that stuff present, especially dark honeys. The darker honeys have all these nutrients and stuff that we consider good for us that are not necessarily good for a colony that can't get out and take cleansing flights. And us humans too. I mean, if we're ingesting food and it's got a lot of bulk in it, we better be able to eliminate it before we start ingesting more food, right? Theoretically. That's it right there, just cane sugar, you know. We buy semi-loads. Roger got some sugar from us. I got a good price on sugar in our store right now, 65 cents a pound. I'm not sure where you can buy it for that. I got a couple semi-loads and I got a really good deal. I'm making like $4 on a bag, just enough. It's like I'm doing it for two reasons. It's like a liter. You know how Walmart drops their prices on something like milk so people will come in the store? I'm using sugar. But also, I also understand that it's doing a favor for the beekeeping community. Feeding bees is an expensive prospect. So I don't have to make a ton of money on everything I do. I'm glad to help too. Good nutrition is crucial going into winter. I understand that you just had a pretty good goldenrod pollen flow. That's so important. It's really tough to get a colony through winter if you don't have a late summer, fall pollen flow. How do they get ready for winter? It's really got to be challenging if they don't have good nutrition flowing into the colony late in the season. This is what good nutrition looks like. If you don't see copious amounts of royal jelly in the bottom of the cell where your larva is, you are experiencing malnutrition. If you can have all the larvae in the world in the colony, but if the bottoms of the cells don't show royal jelly, or brood food in this case, then you're experiencing malnutrition. Now, can you overcome that with sugar syrup and pollen supplement? To some degree, the answer is yes. Sugar syrup is a lot better supplement or a lot better replacement for nectar than pollen supplement is for real pollen. There really isn't any comparison. It's like eating garbage. It's like eating the worst food and expecting to be healthy. It just ain't going to happen. And but recently, they've been putting out some pollen supplements. Let's see if I have a picture of it. Yeah, there's a little bit of self-promotion here. We're carrying this in our store because it has 15% pollen. Global Patty makes a product with 15% pollen in it too. The bees do much better if there's some pollen present. Overwintering nukes, why not? If you got small colonies and they just don't look like they're big enough to make it through winter, put them over a double screen board on top of a strong colony and you just greatly increase their odds of survival. In our neighborhood, and we're probably 10 degrees colder than you guys in the winter, we can get 3 or 4 frames of bees through the winter on top of a double screen board, whereas they'd never make it in a nuke box. They're simple to make. You can make your own. We do ours out of HDO plywood, which is the best plywood on the planet for beekeepers, making lids and bottoms and stuff. You can use anything. Any scrap plywood will do it. You just got to have some holes in there so the heat rises up from the colony below. Even in midwinter when there's no brood present, the colony below is keeping the core of their cluster up to about 83 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's heat rising. And I've done this with something as simple as old paneling out of a house. I mean, just anything will work. The reason for 2 screens, double screen, is that you don't want the colonies sharing pheromones and touching each other through a screen. You can get along with that, but when I use double screens in other ways, I don't want that to happen. We use double screens a lot for starting nukes in the spring. It's really superior than any method I know for starting nukes, and that's another half-hour lecture right there. Easy to make. This is just lath in between 2 sheets of 1/8" hardware cloth. You can use metal window screen also, it works fine. It'll get clogged up quicker. Don't use fiberglass window screen because the bees can chew through it. Ask me how I know. Yeah, there you go. And you can feed the nukes up on top as shown here. February. So we're kind of moving out of winter here now. We're moving into more of the late winter, early spring management stuff. This is a really good time to check your stores and watch for starving. In our neighborhood, we have the potential for more starvation in March than almost any other time of year. Down here, I'm going to guess it would be mid-February to late February, because the bees start rearing brood down here sometime maybe early January, perhaps even shortly after Christmas. And if you don't have a lot of stores on the colony, by mid-February, they're going through it fast. A broodless colony can get through the winter on very relatively small amounts of honey, but once they start rearing brood, it's a whole different picture. They're going to burn through the fuel fast, and especially if they turn into 6, 7, 8 frames of brood, a couple frames of honey can disappear real quick. Highly recommend checking in February, depending on how heavy you went into winter. You know, if you didn't go into winter with a lot of weight, you might be checking in January too. And I don't like feeding bees syrup in winter. If you're going to feed in midwinter, I would recommend using fondant instead, because you don't create the First of all, in cold weather, they won't take the syrup. And in cold weather, even if they do, it's not good for them to be ingesting something that's 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And with fondant, you don't have any of those problems. If you have a fondant patty on top of a cluster, it'll actually absorb some of the condensation that occurs in winter. It almost keeps the colony in better shape. It can absorb so much water that eventually, sometimes it can get kind of soupy. As long as it doesn't start running down between the frames, it's okay. The bees will take it. They need water to work on this fondant anyway. And you can see us here feeding with an inside feeder. This would have been this picture was taken in Unadilla, Georgia, which is actually south of here. And we were having to feed in February because they were out of food. Inside feeders are okay. I use them. I own a lot. I prefer a bucket on top because it's less problematic, especially for small colonies. They'll do a lot better by being fed up above through a hole in the lid or inner cover, whatever mechanism you use. These inside feeders can create a little bit of extra moisture that can get a little mildewy in cold weather. Perhaps if it's cold, the bees aren't taking it readily, and it can just kind of get icky in there, for want of a better word. Combined queenless colonies. It's interesting to me how let's just pick a number. You can send 100 colonies into winter. You know they're queen right. You saw her. She was there. And then come mid-February, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% of them just aren't there anymore. It happens. Stuff happens. They're just like people. We don't all live forever, And even if they're looking good, you have this small percentage that just kind of disappears over winter. So and by the way, going into winter, like right now actually, if you've got queenless colonies, or colonies that have a bad queen and you can't get a queen to fix them, if they're not going to make it through winter, right now is the time to kill that queen or combine that colony with something that's bigger. In some cases, you can take 2 or 3 small units, kill 2 queens and leave the good one behind, combine them, and now you've got something that will actually make it through winter. I like using the phrase, take your winter losses in the fall as much as possible. Of course, there's going to be some issues in the spring, we know that, but right now is the time to do really good checks. If the queen's doing a bad job, get rid of her right now. Add those bees to something that can make use of those assets. You'll actually, if you do that in the spring, you'll have more assets to work with than you would if you try to nurse all these dinky, not so good queen colonies through the winter. Split or equalize to minimize swarming. This was taken in Unadilla too, isn't that beautiful? Yeah, and you can see all the nukes on the ground. I'm going to guess this was taken probably mid-March down there, maybe early March. I think that's a Bradford pear, redbud, yeah. Yeah, it's a big redbud, isn't it? Yeah, the bees love them, I know that. Up in our neighborhood, I don't see big ones like that. Something else I've learned, I'm going to address Keith here for a moment because he's a plant expert. I used to consider Bradford pears as nothing much. Now suddenly I'm taking a different look at them because I'm starting to see, weight gain during the Bradford pear bloom. I never used to see that. Maybe because there's more, I don't know.
Yeah, the density of them, Bob, has gotten to a point now where I think they have become somewhat privet-like.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
That they are an invasive exotic that the bees take advantage of.
Yeah. I used to pollinate pears in Oregon, and the bees never did much on them. In fact, they didn't even like them because there was other stuff blooming, and the growers would have us move the bees in when the pear trees were in 20% bloom, so they wouldn't find all the other stuff that's outside of the orchard. The same with cranberries, had to do the same thing with cranberries. Okay, lovely sight. I mean, this is like kind of nice and neat and fun, but also kind of a, there goes a $200 bill, you know. That's a pretty decent swarm. Actually, it's in the middle of a nuke yard, so you know what that is? That's several virgin queen swarms that all got together. But I like showing it because it's a good picture of a swarm. And yes, they do. You get a bunch of them going up in the air, and suddenly you've got, I love it when people say, that swarm filled 3 5-gallon buckets. I said, well, that's more than one swarm, trust me. Swarmed, split it for a harvest. You know, early in my beekeeping career, when I was trying to make money at this thing, if I had a colony that swarmed on me, it really kind of gave me a bad feeling, like, you know, a 4-letter word feeling, you know. And but nowadays, I'm completely over that, because when I find a colony that has just swarmed and it's full of swarm cells, guess what shows up in 20 minutes? About 4 or 5 or 6 nukes that now become something that possibly is worth more money than the honey that that colony would have made. If you can look at a colony that just swarmed as a harvest too and approach it like that, you won't have that 4-letter word feeling quite as often. And guess what? Swarm cells make the very best queens. Absolutely, without a doubt. Recent research has shown it. And for a few reasons, honestly. The egg that is laid is already better than the egg that got laid in a worker cell. It's already weighs more, it's got more nutrition. I guess that's what the weight means. It's got more nutrition present. It's already better. And of course, the bees treat it like a queen. You know, within 8 to 12 hours, they're feeding it copious amounts of royal jelly, maybe more so than would have occurred if it was an emergency cell or something like that. And there is 2 kinds of food. There's royal jelly and there's brood food. They're not identical. At some point in the early days of a larva's life, a worker bee and a drone start getting something that's a little chemically different. It's a little different than royal jelly. Royal jellies, and I guess that's a lecture in itself too. I don't even understand it all, but there's different nutrients in royal jelly than there is in brood food. Good luck. This is what you're looking for. That's not around here, by the way. Those are my bees in South Dakota about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, that's what they did that year. That place is a feast or famine place, South Dakota. You know, you got the prairies, and when they bloom so full of that sweet clover, it's just crazy. It's heaven on earth for the bees. The really long days, you know, they work 16 or 18 hours, and it just floods in. And then the next year, you might have very little, and they only make, you know, 50 or 60. They consider 60 pounds a bad crop. You know, down here, 60 pounds is not the best year, but, you know, at least we made something. See, up there, 60 pounds may not even pay for the fuel and all that stuff to get up there. There's our website, BlueRidgeHoneyCompany.com, Facebook, Blue Ridge Honey Company, Blue Ridge Honey Company, YouTube channel, Bob Binnie. The website has just recently, in about the last 4 months, 5 months, we've actually got bee supplies on the website. And it's actually decent. I know I'm not trying to be a salesman here, but now we have a decent website, and we have a pretty good supply of stuff. It's not a date ant or a man lake, but it's not bad. And we have some good prices on many things. We're trying to compete. You know, I kind of have this attitude, you can make, the way of making money is to sell less for more and more for less. I'm trying to kind of fit in the middle there. We're not dumping our stuff at, you know, terrible low prices, but we're not expensive either. So it's worth looking at. And if anybody's going to the expo up in Kentucky, we're taking pre-orders for the expo. If you're going to be up there, you can get it delivered to you. Facebook, Blue Ridge Honey Company. Jesse puts in 1 or 2 things every week, something just to keep it interesting. Might be last Sunday's video or a sale on something, a sale on sugar, stuff like that. And then if you're interested in beekeeping videos on YouTube, just go to YouTube and type in my name and it comes right up. Apparently there aren't any other Bob Binnie's beekeepers on YouTube. Huh?
There's no other Bob Binnie.
I don't, well, yeah, there's no other Bob Binnie, for better or for worse. But we're doing okay with the YouTube. Some of the videos are very good. Some of them are just a filler, aren't that great. And now we're getting videos that are 5 years old and probably need to be redone because I'm slowly getting better at it. And by the way, I am filming this, so if it looks good, you'll see it show up on YouTube. Yeah. If it doesn't look good, you'll never see it again. So that's how that works. And trust me, plenty of stuff never makes it to YouTube. But this one might. I know I've been doing a little bit of coughing and not really talking real well. My mind isn't quite as clear as it could be. I'm just a little bit under the weather. Need more honey and propolis, right? So anyway, with that, if I have time, I'll take some.
Sure.
She's saying yes. I'll take your question now if you can remember it.
Okay, let me ask my question, but first give you an observation or comment question.
Yeah, the feral hives are showing up.
And the question is, what mechanism or mechanisms do you think are going on to give resistance to those mites?
Why is that a loaded question? What mechanisms for resistance? I'll get on that soapbox. Give me a minute here. There's a lot of attention to VSH, Varroa sensitive hygiene. Absolutely one of the mechanisms, maybe the best mechanism, but I feel there are other mechanisms also. If you're testing only for Varroa sensitive hygiene and you're breeding for that trait alone, I think you could be missing some potential for other mechanisms. Purdue University has mite chewing bees. I've heard of ankle chewing bees. What else? Keith, what other mechanisms for resistance? There's several now showing up, and some they don't, and mechanisms that we probably don't even know about. So I think it's, you need to be open-minded when you're trying to breed bees for resistance. I think there's more than just hygienic behavior as a mechanism for mite resistant. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Well, maybe. Do you think there might be more specialization within the hives? You were talking about colonies like the first.
Okay, that's another rabbit hole. We'll go down there. The word is polyandry. He's asking, all this diversification in a colony, how important is that? And it's extremely important. They show that, I just watched a lecture by David Tarpey, and the average for mating is, what was it? I think it was 14 or something like that. Of course, some go way up to 50 or 60, and some are only 2 or 3. But if all of us were on a desert island alone, some of us would be very good at some traits. Some of us would be very good at other things. And as a group, we might have a better chance of survival than we would just as a singular or a pair. And that's the way that's the way humanity works. It's all this different traits and abilities and skills that makes us successful. And a beehive's the same way. So this diversification, because of many matings by the queen, is extremely important. And if she only mates with 1 or 2 drones, that's where you can see beautiful brood patterns. Looks like she's doing great, but you can see early supersedure because the bees know there's a problem. And that's another rabbit hole. You often see that in the very earliest queens out of South Georgia because they're pushing the envelope a little too soon. If they just wait another 7 or 10 days, they'd have more drones in the air, better odds of good weather. Getting the first queens out of South Georgia on March 15th is a huge mistake in my view. Are they there? Are they available? Absolutely. 18th. And some years it works. Some, it's not every year I'm talking about. Some years it works perfectly. But when you get a package bees and everybody's complaining about early supersedure, in many cases it's because the queens, were super early, and you just need to wait a while. You need lots of mating. It's so important. Polyandry is the word. I have, in my view, an excellent video on that. It was an interview with Keith Delaplane from the University of Georgia. And I think if you go to my channel and type in my name, Bob Binnie, and then put polyandry behind my name, I think that video will pop up. It's worth watching. Keith did a really good job of talking about polyandry there. And I actually did a good job of asking questions. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. So it's a good video. It's not well viewed. That's the interesting. I have this thing where I can on my YouTube channel where I can watch the views and watch how many people stay to the end and all this stuff. And that video did not get a lot of views. It's because people, that's not a very exciting thumbnail, is it? Polyandry. But man, it's a good video. It's very informative. I'd recommend, out of all my videos, I put it in one of the top 10. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Keith.
Bob, have you had any experience at feeding beet sugar?
I've not fed any beet sugar, and I've heard two sides of this story. I've heard many people say that it just doesn't matter. The bees use it just as well. But I've also heard a few people say that they thought there was a difference and there was a problem with it. I honestly don't know. Do you have an opinion on that?
I don't know. I've got to do a nutrition talk next weekend at the University of Wyoming on honeybee nutrition. And I know up there,
They got a lot of beet sugar in Wyoming.
beet sugar.
Well, Jerry Latner, whom I consider someone who knows a lot about sugar syrup, he certainly taught me a lot. He says they both work. He said they're indistinguishable to the bees.
That's been the general consensus, but there's a lot of vociferous folks that say there's a difference in it.
Yeah, I got to be careful because I really don't know. I'd like to know. I'd like to know the difference. Luckily in Georgia, it's pretty much cane sugar. Well, my loads of sugar have been coming out of Savannah, so I don't think they're shipping beets from Missouri or Montana over to Savannah.
Kind of keeps it regionalized because
Yeah.
it costs so much to ship that weight. So
Yeah.
the areas that produce beet sugar, that's where it tends to stay, and
I-
sugar stays.
That sounds like a good research study to me. Somebody needs to do that one. Measure all the parameters, the amount of hydrogen peroxide and all this stuff that's occurring. That's a good study. Roger, you need to do that.
I'll do it, no problem on it.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
When you were top feeding with the buckets, what's the point of the bucket? Is there just a jar underneath that? Or
Oh, I
is there
see.
something different?
Well, all of our lids, which I don't have a good picture here, all of our lids are flat, excuse me, flat lids. We have a 71 millimeter hole in those lids. The reason for that size is because you can put a standard quart jar or 5-pound honey jar or the old fashioned, 70G lid type of canning jars in that hole. If you want to feed with a bucket, you can put a bucket over that hole too. And that's, in very small colonies, we use the jar, which is 1 or 2 holes in the cap. And if the colony's a little larger, we'll use a 1 or 2 gallon bucket so they can get more and it lasts longer. And this one piece gold metallic 70 millimeter lid that you see on so many honey quart jars plugs that hole perfectly. That's our strategy. You don't need that big of a hole. And if you're only using buckets, a hole the size of your thumb will work. Something you can put a cork in. Well, we like the big hole so we can use the jars when we want. Yeah. Yes, sir.
On the queen replacement, because I understand what you said is get a queen as early as you can in the spring, let her lay all summer, overwinter, and replace her the next spring. Is that right?
Well, let's pick that apart a little bit. I don't want you to get the queen as early as you can out of South Georgia because I think the very first round of queens can possibly be problematic. So maybe the first queen that you can use in your outfit in Sparta, Georgia, which would be a week or 2 later than Waycross or something like that, I assume. So yeah, if you get a spring queen, she's going to give you a good colony going into winter, better than a queen from the previous year. But if you get a queen later in the season, she has the potential to do even better than that because she didn't go through the spring peak brood rearing. Now the spring queen is fine. I'm not going to argue that point. Any queen from this same calendar year is going to increase the odds of overwintering in comparison to a queen from the previous year. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Heads are nodding, so I'm making some sense. Yeah, Keith.
Bob, there's an old, I guess you'd say an old saw, that an overwintered queen is a queen that's going to swarm. Have you seen any difference in swarming behavior?
Yeah, even a fall queen will swarm more the next spring than a queen from the next spring. Yeah, there's something about it. I don't know if it just comes down to age, literally, like if she's got 6 months extra on her. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but it's absolutely correct that if a queen overwinters, the odds of them making preparation to swarm just went up a little, even if she's a very late queen from September. But the September queen will have less tendency to swarm than the early spring queen. So just know all that, yeah. Need a chart on that, don't we? Put months on there. And
When do you requeen your hives?
all year long. The question is, when do I requeen my colonies? I can't just go in and requeen all my colonies at the same time. So we pick them off all summer long. We'll requeen an entire yard perhaps in April, maybe, or several yards. We have 30-something yards. And then a good time to requeen is when you're splitting, because you got the queen in your hand, maybe. Depending on the technique you use for splitting, you might already have located the queen. That's a good time to requeen, because you've done the work already, half the work. So we'll do some in the spring, and then we'll do some a little later, and a little later, and a little later. We just pick the yards off all summer long, and we're generally done requeening by July. Because the later in the season, here's the problem with requeening late in the summer. There's two problems with it. One, if you don't have a nectar flow, robbing is much more prevalent, and your queen acceptance took a dive. When the bees get angry from robbing and very defensive, and you've got a yard of bees and you've got to leave colonies open to find the queen, and you start getting stung because they're robbing, your percentage of queen acceptance just went down, no matter what you do. There is one technique that can help in instances where you have challenges like that, and that is push-in cage. Do you know, everybody? Okay, I see a lot of puzzled looks, I'll explain it. I make push-in cages out of 1/8-inch hardware cloth. The dimension I use is, it looks like a block of wood. We use a block of wood to mold it around. We take 1/8-inch hardware cloth, and when we're done, it's 3 by 4 inches and 1 inch deep. And then we cut a little snip in one of the sides so we can fold it open to put a queen in there, and then fold it back. And just release your queen in there without a bunch of bees in there. The perfect place to do that is on a brood comb with a few hatching bees. You don't want the whole comb hatching, because it can overfill the little cage you just put there. You want maybe 6, 7, 8, 10, maybe even 12 bees to hatch in that cage. And then you ideally want a few open cells where the queen can start laying. Once the queen settles in and starts laying for a week, you can take that queen away, and acceptance just went up to pretty close to 100%, as long as you don't have a lot of other issues. Brother Adam talked about queen acceptance, and he made a very bold statement. In his opinion, the behavior of the queen was more important than anything, including any pheromone profiles. And he was of the opinion that a queen that was only a couple weeks old would not experience the acceptance that a queen that was even 3 or 4 weeks old. And he was right. That man's Doug Somerville that I quoted from Fat Bees, Skinny Bees, he has a research study on the acceptance of queens initially. And also in that data, he shows how many queens are still present after 15 weeks. And if the queen is only one, most commercial, I don't know if I can use the most, many commercial queen producers are on a 2-week cycle. In other words, they put a ripe cell in, and 2 weeks later they harvest the queen. And Doug Somerville showed that if you just waited 1 more week, that the acceptance was tremendously better, and 28 days was even better than that. Beyond 28 days, you'd reach the point of diminishing returns at 28 days. So, you know, from a commercial queen producer, it's pointless to go beyond that. Brother Adam picked up on this and understood it, and he said it's the behavior of the queen that made the difference. Now, he said that before there was all that was 50 years ago when he said that. That book was published in 1975. And since then, there's been a lot of research on pheromones and all this stuff, which I'm sure there's a lot of chemistry going on too. But it was just about the nervousness. And it's true. If you release a brand new queen in a colony, she's just like a teenager running around. She's nervous. And just give her a little time to settle down, start laying some eggs. And the bees just, it's like nothing, they just take her. Kind of got off subject there. Any other questions? Okay. Well, once again, Mary, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.